I think we're going to see it in the next 60 to 90 days, and will absolutely fall on her sword for BK. She is a true believer. She believes he's innocent. She has an unhealthy relationship with him.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Listen to Pavarotti. Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I am your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4Ks. And sorry it's taken me a little bit longer to get these videos out to you, but I am actually going through and really working on these things for you now to make sure that the information that I bring is spot on. Now, remember, this is all just Pav's opinion. Right? I'm not here to slander anyone. I'm not here to expose anything that I'm not supposed to expose. I'm just here to give you my opinion. Everything I say is alleged. I did a video the other day where I went through and I gave my opinion on a scenario that I think is playing out before our very eyes. Well, I'm going to expand on that in this one to include a little bit more detail now that there's more details out. And it's so easy pickings right now. It is so easy pickings. There is so many reports and mainstream morons and interviews being conducted and newspaper reports, or whatever you call a newspaper report these days. But you can grab your information from so many different directions, which I find fascinating. And I believe by the end of this video, you're going to find it fascinating as well. And I implore anybody that, like I watched my guy Dago the other day. I mean, you know, me and Dago are cool. I love that dude. But they were going through and they were having conversations on the video that I put out. More than welcome to do it on this one as well. I do think it would be important, though, for you to watch the entire video before you go through and have the conversations about it, because it'll make those conversations even more unique. And it's almost kind of, I mean, I hate to even have to do this because I believe I'm going to expose, possibly, if I'm correct, some things that even the defense team probably doesn't want me to expose. But then again, I think about it this way. Who am I? I'm just little old Pavarotti with this little old channel on YouTube, just looking at things and giving my opinion about it. So, I mean, what is my opinion? I'm just somebody, right? So what's the big deal? In my opinion, you're going to understand very clearly by the end of this is the actors that are involved and what's taking place, and the people right now that everybody out there are thinking of as villains, especially in the open-minded community, such as the community we call the pro-burgers. I guarantee you they are up in arms, mad at certain people right now. After watching these interviews, I can understand why. Except old Pav is just, for some reason, he looks at things a little bit different than everybody else. And I think the people that they are mad at the most are probably the people that they should be mad at the least. When I say hold on to your hats, folks, I mean hold on to your hats. But before you grab them, strap yourself into your chair, because once again, I don't want you to blow straight through the roof when you hear this video. And it is quite possible that you will if you don't strap yourself down. Let's roll. People are going to think I'm absolutely insane, but let me lay this out for you, okay? I got to lay this out. You've got this, I mean, 4D chess happening now, y'all. It's 4D chess. And I mean, I don't even know how to explain how perceptive you have to be to be able to see this, but you're going to hear things in this video that's going to blow your socks off. So how does 4D chess happen with these individuals? Well, we've already done so much work up to this point that we know who's expendable in all of this, right? The ones that are expendable are Brent Turvey. Why is he expendable? Because Nodell has done most of the part in the crime scene recreation that he's supposed to do. And then the defense team has two other experts that are working on the crime scene recreation, along with Nodell. And I pull their names for you, but they've done their complete recreation reports as well. So Turvey is expendable. And when you get over to the CSLI side, their expert is Slavinsky, not Cy Ray. So Cy Ray is expendable. And then when you go to the defense team, the one that is expendable up here is Ann Taylor, because she's been front man this entire time. So knowing that, let's go ahead and see how this thing plays out. Let me show you some things. I said in my video the other day, and everybody out there that watched it heard it explicitly, that part of this plan is going to have to be one of Kohberger's defense attorneys falling on the sword. And what that means is, if none of his defense attorneys were willing to fall on the sword, then there's no way Kohberger would be able to gain any traction in his post-conviction relief. That's why I say you've got to understand that. If they weren't willing to fall on the sword, all they have to do is write an affidavit saying, this is what I did. Post-conviction relief goes away. There's nothing anybody could do. But if one of them were willing to fall on the sword, the post-conviction relief actually can happen. So one of them is going to fall on the sword. Now, I want you to really pay close attention as we go through this entire video, because something's going to become very clear to you. You're going to hear everybody else's names mentioned by each other. And the two names that you're never going to hear brought up are going to be Bicka Barlow and Elisa Massoff. They're going to be missing from every single discussion, which tells me the likely person that's going to fall on the sword is going to be Ann Taylor. Or else you would hear these names being brought up, but they're hidden from every discussion. The closest you get to anybody even bringing them up is his other council members. So, how does this take place? We take the expendables, right? And we have to create a fake public rift. I love this. But the fake public rift takes these expendables and it puts them all at a different corner of a triangle, and they're all fighting each other. This is how this has to take place. You've got Cy Ray coming out, and he plays a very interesting part in this. This is what's crazy. But he's coming out and he's throwing Turvey under the bus, throwing Ann Taylor under the bus, saying Bryan Kohberger's guilty. Then you've got Turvey over here, who's coming out and he's throwing Ann Taylor under the bus. And he is inadvertently throwing Cy Ray under the bus by saying Ann Taylor isn't saying anything about what Cy Ray is saying. So they're each at the end of a pyramid, and Ann Taylor's coming out and she's throwing Brent Turvey under the bus, and we haven't heard her say anything yet about Cy Ray. But here's step one, is we got to go through this. Let me show you where Brent Turvey is throwing Ann Taylor and Cy Ray under the bus. And then we'll get into what Cy Ray is now saying. And it's the most hilarious thing I've ever seen in my life. And when we get to the Cy Ray part, I'm going to show you why what Cy Ray is saying is absolutely part of the game. It's absolutely part of the game. Watch this. Okay, first, let me show you how Brent Turvey fires off against both Cy Ray and Ann Taylor, okay? You've got to see this from so many different angles. It is really interesting to watch it all play out. So, Kohberger defense expert wants his lawyers under oath after killer cites findings and bid to undo guilty plea. He wants the lawyers under oath, like Turvey is throwing Ann Taylor under the bus, and he's demanding that they put her on the stand under oath, which is exactly what everybody on the Kohberger conspiracy wants to happen. That is where Ann Taylor will fall on the sword. So now we're demanding publicly that she is put on the stand under oath so that she can literally do that. And who's doing it? Turvey. In the article, though, let's see what it says. Forensic expert, formerly retained by Bryan Kohberger's defense, wants the admitted killer's former lawyers on the witness stand amid a push to renege on his guilty plea in the murders of 4 University of Idaho students. Everybody involved needs to be put under oath, starting with Ann Taylor and her legal team, defense expert Brent Turvey told Fox News Digital. Kohberger pleaded guilty in July of 2025 to the unalivings of Ethan, Maddie, Xana, and Kaylee. He was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms without parole and an additional 10 years. There's the affidavit and all that we've already heard about. Kohberger recently filed a petition for post-conviction relief seeking to undo his guilty pleas. He alleges he was coerced into accepting the plea agreement and that his attorneys failed to communicate potentially exculpatory evidence. The petition references hair evidence recovered during the investigation. The hairs were found under where Cheapin's right hand was photographed in Kernodle's bed, affixed to the frame by dried blood. It's the side of the bed that was touching the wall. In December, before sentencing, Turvey examined the state's evidence and saw that it was still present on the bed frame. There's a photo. In terms of color, the hairs are a mix of light and dark brown. By a rough estimate, there are more than 24 visible strands, and we've all seen that on the bed frame. Although there are no measurements for reference in the photo, the strands appear to be between 3 and 4 inches. That is incorrect. Those strands of hair are definitely more than 3 to 4 inches, as we see right here. Turvey, a forensic scientist and senior partner at Forensic Solutions LLC, who has testified at more than 70 trials, found the hair when he traveled to Moscow, Idaho to review evidence in person. He said Kohberger was ruled out based on physical examination of the hairs, but they were not DNA tested. The FBI lab said Kohberger is excluded. Turvey told Fox News Digital this is not his hair. The hairs were first publicly described in Christopher Whitcomb's book, Broken Plea, which Kohberger referenced in a New York Times interview. Kohberger also mentioned the hairs specifically in his petition for post-conviction relief. Turvey said Kohberger's latest filing raises broader questions that extend beyond the hair evidence, arguing the court should closely examine the former criminology student's allegations that he was coerced into pleading guilty and received ineffective legal representation. The court should want to know what evidence Bryan Kohberger has regarding these clear accusations of coercion and effective assistance. Turvey said Kohberger's claims need to be taken seriously and investigated by the court. This will require Ann Taylor and her co-counsel to answer some very difficult questions, he said. Not just why she attacked her own experts for revealing the possibility of the exculpatory material, but for failing to respond to another expert that is out there claiming he's guilty and that he knew it from the start. Turvey has had a public rift with Kohberger's former defense team. Taylor and the 2 co-counsel previously accused him of violating confidentiality agreement and said they were appalled by his public comments, while Turvey denied disclosing confidential information. Fox News Digital reached out to Taylor for comment, but did not immediately receive a response. Shannon Gray, an attorney representing the family of the victims, Kaylee Gonzalez, disputed the significance of the evidence. So what has Turvey done in this? He's further put himself at odds with Ann Taylor publicly. He only mentions the other counsel as part of the team, never names anybody else. But he also is admonishing Ann Taylor for not responding to Cy Ray out there running his mouth saying Kohberger's guilty and he's got evidence of it. This is where you have to be a very perceptive person, y'all. Because what he's done in this is further put himself at odds with Ann Taylor and explicitly Cy Ray. So there is part 1, okay? We got Turvey out in the public demanding Ann Taylor go on the stand, answer questions about being ineffective, putting himself at odds with her. We've got Turvey also putting himself at odds with Cy Ray and calling Cy Ray out. It looks like a true battle to everybody who can't see beyond the scope of things. But this is just step 1, okay? Okay, so here comes Pob's theory of what the game being played is. So everybody understands before we really get into the IRA stuff. But for all this to work, you have to first create public reason for filing outside of the case files, right? So Kohberger doesn't just sit there in prison until the time comes and then files for all this stuff out of nowhere because he's going over his own discovery. See, that doesn't create anything. So what has to happen is they have to give Kohberger a reason for him to file on this evidence that was never discovered to him. How do they do that? Well, they write a book and they put it out to the public. Kohberger then is able to read the book, pick out reasons from the book and say, well, hey, I was never told about this. This has all been a sham. Everybody's against me. I'm filing for post-conviction relief. A good chess game means you have to look at every move, even the move of the pawns involved, right down to the public statement that Kohberger put out, specifically noting circumnavigated by a broken plea, and then expressing why he said broken plea to the New York Times in that he was referring to the book, which takes everything out of the court record and puts it all on the focus of a book. And it starts to create all of this in the public realm so everybody can see it playing out. And that's how they get to see it playing out, from the book. I mean, just genius strategy here, if I'm right. So that's step number one. Now, the next step in that is we can't think any of this is any type of collusion. So we got to have Ann Taylor come out and admonish Turvey publicly. The defense is appalled at Mr. Turvey, is appalled by Mr. Turvey. They're appalled by him doing this. For doing this. Hey, why are you doing this? Which makes no sense to anybody in the whole case. Why would she admonish her own expert? She has to, because she has to separate herself from being part of this big conspiracy, right? Conspiracy theory.
It's not an evidentiary issue in which you can lay down Mr. Ray's conspiracy theory without any evidence.
Then, the next step to this is Brent Turvey calling for Ann Taylor to be put on the stand. Why? So that she can fall on the sword on the stand for Bryan Kohberger and actually make this thing work and get Kohberger a new trial.
He comes out, says all this nonsense. Bryan writes his thing. The last missing piece, and mark my words, I think we're going to see it in the next 60 to 90 days, Ann will absolutely fall on her sword for BK. She is a true believer. She believes he's innocent. She has an unhealthy relationship with him.
Next step is we have to have another actor in this, y'all. And the next actor plays a crucial role. Because now that everything's been released and we've all tore it apart, we know that the mainstream morons out there have tore it apart as well, because they only report on the things in there that even remotely point to Bryan Kohberger's guilt, and they ignore everything else, but they know it's there. So they have to have the public behind this. The public needs to say, take him to trial. We've got all this evidence. He's guilty. Let's do this. And if they actually look at the evidence, they likely wouldn't do that. So they need something to stir up the public and give them confidence about this evidence. So then comes in cop IRA, hating Kohberger, saying he's guilty, hating the defense team, and he's going to tell everybody about this evidence that could exist that literally proves Kohberger did it beyond a shadow of a doubt, stirring up that public outrage. But it doesn't stop there, because there's a step in this that's missing. Well, one of those steps is when he does it, he's got to put himself at odds with Ann Taylor and Brent Turvey. And it also has to work both ways. So all these people are on opposite ends of the pyramid, admonishing each other, right? They're separating themselves as far as they can. But there's another step that has to happen, because all the public, they knew they were going to hear this, and it's all we hear, right? Quit putting the families through this. Don't grant Kohberger's post-conviction relief. Stop putting the families through all of this torture. So the last step in this thing is they've got to get the families on board with the trial as well. How do they do this? Well, they need them publicly demanding, accept Kohberger's post-conviction relief. Let's go to trial. Bring the death penalty. We know he did it. We should have had the death penalty in the beginning. And how do you get them to do that? Well, let's go ahead and take one of our antagonists. Let's put them right together. Let's talk about that evidence that he believes proves Bryan Kohberger did it. And all that the FBI and the state has to do is look a little bit closer and they'll find that evidence and they can gain that conviction. And then we can have the trial and put him to death. Super key part of this plan. But then there's one other thing that's happening that is amazing to me, but it isn't even, I don't think, part of this plan, because I don't think you could get these morons in part of this plan. This is happening organically, and that is the mainstream morons inadvertently participating in this plan that's going to push it over the top. That's why I feel confident that I can expose everything that I believe is happening, and it doesn't matter. It's going to happen anyway.
But I want them to give him his wish. You want any trial? Fine. We have regretted the plea ever since we did it, and here's our chance. Why can't we do that, Steve?
Let's go to the new interview that Enton did with Cy Ray and Steve G, knowing what I know in my mind because I've studied Cy Ray's report. I know what they have, what they don't have. So I know when I hear what Cy Ray say what he's saying, I know it's not right. But who doesn't know? Steve G.
You talked about Bryan Kohberger potentially being at the house before. Can you elaborate on that a little more? I mean, are you able to, and I know it's not exact, but are you able to say whether he was actually inside the house?
Yeah, so I'm gonna be a little bit more responsive on these questions and drag it out a little bit. So if I'm going on and on, stop me.
Yeah, and you can do that on this. We have unlimited time, so feel free.
Thankfully.
Yeah,
and 100%, like, I'll make myself available to the family, by the way, 24/7. Like, if you guys have follow-up questions going forward, by all means. When I heard that you guys wanted to have this conversation, I actually it meant a lot to me, and I was like, oh, finally, I can talk to the victim's family. What I want to cover on that piece is, when we start looking at the house itself, there's a couple different things we can look at. AT&T has a very specific report, and it's called Lokdebor. And I know it sounds like a silly word. It's LOCDBOR, Lokdebor, and it's location database of record. This will include estimated latitude and longitudes, and they range from 25 meters out to 3,000, 30,000 meters, so they can get very big. Historically, there's accuracy issues with this report. So if you just take all the data and you throw it on the map and you think that's accurate, you're going to have a lot of problems. A really good example in this case is there's a time when Bryan goes up to Seattle and one of his Lokdebor hits shows him in New Orleans.
Let me tell you, I'm these guys' worst nightmare because I actually listen to what they say. So you heard Cy Ray just say right there, and it's very important for you to grasp this. He starts off with, okay, AT&T, and you need to remember this because I have to refer back to it here in just a minute. But AT&T, their Lokdebor records that come with AT&T, Cy Ray says these records can tell you where somebody's at from 35 meters all the way up to 30,000 meters, in that range. That's how accurate they typically are with the Lokdebor from AT&T, 35 to 30,000 meters. He says they're historically inaccurate. If you try to use those, you're going to have a lot of problems because, for example, in Bryan's Lokdebor data, at one point where they know he's in Seattle, his Lokdebor shows him all the way in New Orleans, Louisiana, which is, I guess, about 2,000 miles or more. So very important to catch this. He starts off and explains how Lokdebor with AT&T is totally inaccurate. Now let's continue to listen because I'm going to show you what actually Ray does to these guys. And Ray may be some kind of evil genius in all this.
So that gives you an idea of the accuracy issues. There's two factors, and like I said, I'm going to pile on a lot of data for you guys. The next thing that comes into play is the actual handset, the phone itself. iPhone actually restricts a lot of third-party apps and even the mobile carrier to some points of getting precise location data, which a lot of people don't realize. If I try to ping a phone, that phone ping can actually be screwed up by Apple itself to instead of getting this nice, neat little GPS, I get this 5,000 meter GPS range, and you can be anywhere in that 5,000 meters. Samsung, on the other hand, is a very chatty phone. It's preloaded with all kinds of silly apps and ridiculous monitoring. If anybody's ever had a Samsung, when you first power that thing up, like there's 100 apps on that thing. It's good for law enforcement because when we get a phone that's a Samsung phone, it's typically very chatty on the network. We're going to see a lot more connectivity. Samsung's also unique that if I do certain things with certain apps that require location data, such as GPS or navigation, that accuracy from the 3,000 or the 5,000 meter ranges come down to 25 meters. And in this particular case, if you look at those precise measurements, there's probably 5 that land directly on what would be the living room of the house. Like the latitude, longitude is the physical house itself. And, if you put the house back on the map and you map those, the hits are inside the house.
Okay, it's very important to understand what Ray just said here. He went and explained, first of all, an Apple device and how the Apple devices actually block things that make them very inaccurate. And then he explains the difference between what a Samsung device does. And the Samsung device does things that make it very accurate within 25 meters of accuracy. And he said that on 5 occasions, if we took the location and we created a map and we put it on the map, it would put Bryan Kohberger in the house. He made it sound like the way that he explained it to him, that because Kohberger's phone is a Samsung and it's accurate to 25 meters through the GPS apps, that if you put that data on a map, it puts Kohberger in the living room. That's the way he made it sound. But if you paid close attention, all Ray really did was explain the difference between how accurate the Samsung phone is and the iPhone is. And then he said if you take the information and put it on a map, it would show Kohberger in the house. But what information is Ray actually referring to? Was it the information from the Samsung phone? Or was it the AT&T Liedaho report? Listen close.
Now, I'm going to let you keep explaining. I just want to make sure I understand correctly. So, because I haven't heard this before. So you're saying based on the data you saw, the latitude, longitude for Bryan Kohberger's Samsung was in the living room?
The AT&T derived latitude, longitude from the AT&T's network that it estimates a location, it lands in the house. And it's a 25 meter range. So, we're talking 75 feet. So it could be anywhere in the house on any floor. It could technically be outside the house. It could be on the property, but it's showing in the immediate area. Now,
I'm going to let you keep explaining. I just want to make sure I understand correctly. So, because I haven't heard this before. So you're saying based on the data you saw, the latitude, longitude for Bryan Kohberger's Samsung was in the living room?
The AT&T derived latitude, longitude from the AT&T's network that it estimates a location.
See how he did it? He talked about the inaccuracy of the iPhone, the accuracy of the Samsung phone down to 25 meters. Then when he says you can put that on a map and it shows him in the living room, and Enton, who has at least a little bit of smarts, dives in and says, wait a minute, you're telling me you could show him 25 meters in there? He says, well, let me make sure I say it clearly. The AT&T information.
The AT&T derived latitude, longitude from the AT&T's network that it estimates a location
shows it. And it could be in the house, outside of the house, but it gives you 25 meters. But what did he just explain about the AT&T information? Because that's not the Samsung phone information. The AT&T information that he just said actually was 35 to 30,000 meters. Now he correlated it to 25 meters, which makes them think he's talking about the Samsung phone. but he's talking about the Loc debar information from AT&T. He's clearly specified it, which he had already said gives you a range of 35 meters to 30,000, historically inaccurate. One showed he's in Seattle, the other shows he's in New Orleans. But they're not sharp enough to pick up on what Ray's putting down. Because here's what Ray is doing. Unfortunately for them, and I'm going to go ahead and expose it, no critically thinking mind, with all the evidence that we've seen in this case, would say that the FBI did not explore all the information that would have proven Kohberger was in the residence and then hid it from the defense. Everybody knows that what's been hidden from the defense proves the opposite, but the defense never received it in discovery. What Ray is doing is publicly saying what needs to be done by the FBI or law enforcement, the records that need to be actually searched and provided to the defense in discovery, because Ray knows if they did that, then they would absolutely be able to prove Kohberger was not in the residence, was not stalking, would disprove their entire case, but they won't give it to him. So what he's going to have to do is publicly demand that information and get these families on board with demanding it as well, because they think it's going to prove the case against Kohberger. It is a genius move. Ray could, this is all my opinion, I'm just going through listening, trying to figure stuff out. But you know what, Ray, again, he could be, not an evil genius, could just be a genius.
My personal opinion is when I look at those and I map what's happening before and after, and I'm looking at all the other evidence, I think these are accurate locations. And that's, and to Steve's point earlier, this is why court, I think, is so critical for this case. That's an argument to be had in front of the jury where the defense would come in and say, hey, you can't reliably say this. And the prosecution would say, here's why. When done right, I feel that they're reliable.
So when you say accurate locations, you mean you believe, based on your expertise, that he was inside the house on previous occasions?
So I'll qualify a handful of things tonight. And again, Steve, any questions later on, by all means, hit me up. I'm more than happy to pour over anything you want to. One of the things the defense did with me early on in this case is they got outside of the geolocation data and they said, hey, as a former homicide cop, as a homicide sergeant, as a supervisor that supervises these type of investigations, we're interested in anything you can find. And they poured tons of data over. Why that's important too is it's not just the phone stuff. There's a lot of stuff inside the crime scene and things that I've reviewed in the crime scene. I 100% believe that the offender, who is Bryan Kohberger, like there is no alternative theory in my head at this point, he's been in the house before. I think there's absolutely no doubt he was familiar with the basic layout of the house. I'm not saying he was intimately familiar with the entire house, but he had a working knowledge of the house.
Okay, so it's very important to understand what just took place right here. Enton asked, he wants to dive back in, so you think he's in the house. Remember, Ray is giving them answers based off of his expertise and what he's analyzed in the case. So before he dives into this next round of answers that he starts giving, he clarifies. The next statement is not based on his location expertise with the phone records or geolocation.
One of the things the defense did with me early on in this case is they got outside of the geolocation data and they said, hey, as a former homicide cop, as a homicide sergeant, as a supervisor that supervises these type of investigations, we're interested in anything you can find.
But his experience as a cop in general, very important clarification for what he says next. He has to go through and separate what he has looked at in the actual report based on his expertise and what he's about to just totally speculate on that has nothing to do with his report, but it's all just his experience as a cop. Very smart for Ray to clarify that. And you have to keep that in mind for everything he says next.
That house is laid out very weird. I've been through the house. The path that was taken, what we see is what occurred in that house, him coming and going from the neighborhood. There's prior knowledge. There's no doubt in my mind that there's prior knowledge. So that also helps support some of this. One thing I want to kind of circle back to, Bryan, and Steve, you'll find this in my report, and it took me weeks to get the defense to allow me to put this in my report. They didn't want me to put it in there. There are third-party databases that collect what is called MAID ID, so mobile advertiser ID. And you guys have all experienced this where you've searched for, I don't know, a pair of shoes. You've Googled a new pair of shoes you think you wanted, and then 2 days later, you're surfing the internet and some ads are popping up for those shoes. That's based on your mobile advertiser ID. It's a unique number, but there's third-party databases that collect that. And typically, when they're collecting that type of information, it gets a latitude longitude stamp with a timestamp, so we can actually see. Law enforcement can access those databases. You have to have a search warrant. There's a process to go through. In my report, what you'll find is it's towards the very end of it. I actually lay out that, hey, there's more than reasonable suspicion here to believe that this phone has been inside the residence or very close to the residence on these dates. Typical criminal investigation, we would go look at these third-party databases, pull all the mobile advertiser ID data from those dates. Forget the 13th. His phone is off. We're never going to get his phone in or near the house on the 13th, and that's where all the focus was. But if we go back to pattern of life and we pull these other dates leading up to the crime, I feel incredibly confident that they're going to get precise GPS. Now I'm talking 3 meters. So now we're talking less than 10 feet at, around, and very close to the house on those different occasions. The idea that I put this in my report and said, this is the kind of follow-up I would expect to have, and nobody ever, I fully expected as soon as I dropped that report that January, that by February, March, we were going to see discovery on this new data. They didn't even look at it. They didn't even bother with it. It's incredible.
Okay, let's break this down, because after he was talking about his general experience as a cop, then he goes back and clarifies he's now going to be talking about his expertise. And in his expertise, he knows that there's a thing called the MAID ID. In the information around the MAID ID, he actually refers to what he put in his report regarding this. And he says this information would be accurate to 5 meters. If it was obtained by law enforcement, it would show him in the house within 5 meters. But he then explains it was never acquired by the state and discovered to the defense. But he is very confident that if it was, it would prove BK was in the house. Now let's think of this from an evil genius perspective. If Cy Ray really wanted pressure put on law enforcement to get this information, which they would then have to discover to the defense, if he really wanted that information and he knew that it would actually prove Kohberger wasn't there, then what would be the best way about trying to get it? It would be stirring up Steve G to put pressure on him to get this information, because let's face it, any information that they have that they didn't turn over proves Kohberger wasn't there, not that he was there. Any half-wit could figure that out. But you could say, no, Cy Ray is really being serious here, and this is what he really wants to prove Bryan Kohberger's guilty, because that's what he said. Is that the case? Because he mentions he put it in his report. And what did he put in his report around the MAID ID?
Steve, you'll find this in my report. And it took me weeks to get the defense to allow me to put this in my report. They didn't want me to put it in there.
This is why when I listen to these people talk, I hear something totally different than all of your other content creators out there, because I've literally studied these reports. This is Cy Ray's summary of his entire report, which directly correlates to what he's saying right now in this interview. In completing my analysis, I found the following. The cell phone geolocation reports, that's what he's referring to right now with the MADE report, provided by the state in this investigation are intentionally misleading, plagued with omitted exculpatory evidence. Now, what Cy Ray is telling Steve G is the evidence that's omitted is evidence that would prove that Kohberger is guilty. Yet in his report, he says the evidence that is missing is exculpatory evidence.
I'm glad that the verdict was in your favor.
I'm finally happy that the exculpatory evidence was enough to convince the jury.
I always knew you were innocent.
And cannot be relied on to the slightest degree. The absence of work product can only be attributed to one of two things. What are those one of two things that it could only be attributed to, Si. An overwhelmingly incompetent analysis, okay, or intentional concealment to hide exculpatory evidence. So while you say in this interview with Anton and G, you allude to overwhelmingly incompetent analysis, but you don't actually. You allude to a deliberate concealment of this evidence that you say in the interview would prove Kohberger guilty, yet in your report, you let us know that its intentional concealment is to hide the exculpatory evidence.
I'm finally happy that the exculpatory evidence was enough to convince the jury.
Well, you don't hide exculpatory evidence that proves somebody's guilty, y'all. This is where old Pav plays 4D checkers while 4D chess while everybody else plays Go Fish. Mr. Kohberger's AT&T records provide significant detail as it relates to his geolocation pattern of life. The state's investigation is completely void of these patterns. Oh, well, then his pattern of life, he's been telling everybody, shows that he's guilty, though. But what does he say here? I can find no reference to Mr. Kohberger's pattern of life in any report, despite demanding 6 months of AT&T records to establish such a pattern. The reason for this is clear to this investigator, as that pattern of life is tremendously exculpatory for Mr. Kohberger. Whoa! The reason for this is clear to this investigator, Cy Ray. That pattern of life is tremendously exculpatory for Mr. Kohberger. You see, this is how I can listen to his interview and see exactly what the game is, because I've already read and studied this stuff, y'all. Kohberger routinely drives in random locations late at night and early in the morning. He's constantly cycling the power on his phone for different periods of time. His daily geolocation patterns are chaotic. Random travel patterns are normal. Random travel patterns are normal. Investigators relied heavily on inaccurate analysis to establish probable cause in nearly every search warrant affidavit issued to secure evidence against Mr. Kohberger. These inaccuracies are to such an extent any geolocation subject matter expert would immediately recognize them. These inaccuracies are so extreme, they are beyond accidental oversight. He's saying it was on purpose. It is my opinion investigators in this investigation intentionally omitted critical findings, repeatedly and intentionally misled the court, but more importantly, concealed exculpatory evidence.
I'm finally happy that the exculpatory evidence was enough to convince the jury.
Everything he tells them is the evidence is going to prove Kohberger's guilty. Everything in his report lets us know that the evidence that's missing is exculpatory, meaning proves he didn't do it. As a subject matter in this field who has testified over 100 times as a state witness on behalf of the prosecution, I've never seen such deviation from established standards and best practices by a subject matter expert as what I've seen by Special Agent Balance's final cast report. This report was peer-reviewed by a Special Agent somebody. The idea that both qualified and competent subject matter experts missed these errors is inconceivable, which means they didn't miss it, it's intentional. There is substantial justification to believe the errors noted in this report are intentional and a complete manipulation of data to support false statements needed to establish probable cause to obtain search warrants against Mr. Kohberger. It is justified to believe critical exculpatory evidence has been concealed by investigators. It's justified to believe critical exculpatory evidence has been concealed by investigators. It's not justifiable to believe that critical evidence of guilt has been concealed by investigators, y'all. You got to be able to see through this stuff. This would include Mr. Kohberger's timing advance data and other geolocation data, meaning the MADE report he's talking about. that would be sought as a standard operating procedure, yet somehow was overlooked by this investigation. What does the absence of this data say? Well, we heard what he told them, but what he wrote in his report is the absence of this data is an investigation of this nature with the resources available to investigators is beyond unusual. It's simply inconceivable. This report concludes my findings. Cy Ray, 12125.
I do have a question. I think you guys might be interested in this. I believe that the girls went to the A&W. There's a little A&W and a little store.
I know exactly. Yeah, right down the street.
I think this was a pretty routine thing that they hit on a regular basis. And I'm really curious to some of the background there. But one thing that I've always said is missing, and it's really bothered me. Has anybody ever approached you guys on what's called VICAP? Have you ever heard that word VICAP? Or it's basically a history of the victims to everything of where they shop. If they order pizza, where they order pizza. Has anybody ever approached you in this investigation to try to
Closest we got to they were scared once I hired a lawyer. They just stopped talking to me. And my lawyer said they'll answer questions, but to the point of they're not going to be witnesses because they didn't want the gag order to fall over. I told my lawyer, I want the ability to speak on behalf of my child. If anything comes to the point where they're going to put a gag on me, then they can't talk to me.
Now, this right here is very interesting, and this is going to have to be another video. I'm not going to dive into it too deep in this one, but I found that to be very, very interesting because, you know, we have done so much work here as it relates to VICAP, which is the FBI's behavioral analysis unit. But another function that they have is doing victimology and tracking crimes across state lines related to serial offenders and organized crime. And what makes this question that Cy Ray asked about Steve, have they talked to you at all about VICAP? And then seeing Steve's immediate response. His immediate response wasn't, I don't know anything about VICAP, or they didn't want to talk. They didn't tell me about VICAP. No, Steve's response was very clear. They wanted to talk to us and we got a lawyer and we wouldn't talk to him. Now, why would Steve bring up the fact that he had got a lawyer and they wouldn't talk to him when Cy Ray brings up the VICAP? I want you to really think about that for just a minute, and we're just going to go ahead and move forward, and this is going to be another video. Very interesting.
And I had nothing to hide. It was just, you're not going to control me like an asset. I'm going to speak on my daughter's behalf, or I'm going to jail, one or the other. So, yeah, we never got there. We got to the passwords. We got to usernames. They hit Olivia up. Olivia got into the cloud ID. Like, Olivia hacked. It's fake. Like, we know the passwords.
I knew my sister's password on her Apple device, but it was two-factor authentication. So it would send a code to her device and they wouldn't. And still to this day, they've not handed over her phone because they say that they can't get into it. But regarding VICAP, and I apologize if I got that wrong. No, we've never ever heard that. We've never been familiar with that at all.
You would remember it's about almost 300 questions, and it's a deep dive in any information. And this has nothing to do with the gag order. There's no reason they wouldn't do that. The reason I'm asking is there's certain things that would come out in their normal pattern. Like, hey, if they ran to the convenience store, what convenience store would they run to? Is it kind of if they met friends or everybody was going, is there a place that they would converge? And we're getting back into the reliability of the GPS. So I don't want to get too far on a branch saying I know this happened.
Okay, so Cy Ray just threw everybody for a loop, and he went on to say, it had been 300 questions. You'd remember it. He was just trying to dig right there, it seems like. But then you got to follow exactly what Cy Ray says before he gets into this next part. He indemnifies himself again to make sure everybody knows what he's talking about. He said, we're going to get back into the geolocation information now. So,
and we're getting back into the reliability of the GPS. So I don't want to get too far on a branch saying I know this happened.
I don't want to act like everything I'm saying is so accurate. Remember, he doesn't have any geolocation because they did not provide it to the defense and discovery. The only geolocation data he has this point for these circumstances he's talking about is the AT&T Liedaho report, which he has already said is historically inaccurate. 35 to 300 or 30,000 meters. One time it said Bryan's in Seattle when he's in New Orleans. So everything he's about to discuss, don't get it confused. He's referring to the AT&T Liedaho report. And it's kind of clinical the way Cy Ray's doing this.
But there are multiple times that the device, Kohberger's device, is in the area of the house, and then it moves to the parking lot of that A&W root beer. At the same time, multiple residents of the house go to the A&W root beer. So there's times where I can actually see and that, to me, that's what we call a collision. It's one thing to have devices in a general area, but when we see the two devices track together to a point and then track back, that's incredibly telling. So, the idea that nobody has come back to you guys and said, hey, let's talk about the A&W or some of the other friends it's just mind-blowing.
Again, Cy Ray's report versus what he says in the interview, indicating what he's really trying to do here. While I have identified locations Mr. Kohberger and the deceased frequented in common stores located in a small community, I am unable to pinpoint any time period that may indicate any persons of interest could have come into direct contact in these common locations. I'm unable to locate any period of time between June 23rd and November 13th, 2022, where Mr. Kohberger's mobile device is in the same specific area as any of the deceased's mobile devices. I'm unable to identify any patterns that would be consistent to Mr. Kohberger frequenting locations also frequented by the deceased. That I would assume it would include the A&W there. So it is my opinion that geolocation data that I've been provided as of writing this report does not provide any evidence of association between Mr. Kohberger and any of the decedents and or Mr. Kohberger or the decedent's residents. All Cy Ray is doing is trying to get the information to actually be released that proves Bryan Kohberger is innocent, y'all. And he's doing it in a very, very focused way. I almost wonder if Cy Ray has disdain for Mr. G for some reason.
So I have a quick question, and I hope that it comes across the right way. So my question is separating the murders and the burglary from the stalking. And as we know, the state never picked up stalking charges, but the FBI currently still has an active investigation. Do you think that some of those things were not picked up by the state because of this separation? Or do you think that this would have been something that would not have driven a charge or would not have been evidence of a charge that they were not actively pursuing?
I am guessing. This is my opinion of things that I've seen. I'm happy sharing this opinion to whoever, but there's a lot that needs to be filled in for it to land where I say 100% this is what's happening. I'm about 90% here. They back themselves into a corner, into a no-win situation, because the problem the FBI has with stalking right now is they cannot prove stalking in the work product that they do. It'll never hold up in court. In fact, I don't think a federal prosecutor would even take the case. So that's why we haven't seen the FBI proceed with that. Does the FBI have information right now or potentially the ability to go get information to prove that case? 100%.
Again, Cy Ray just used that ridiculous question to jump right back into, does the FBI have the ability to get that information to prove that? 100%. Meaning the information with the geolocation that Cy Ray absolutely, and the MAID ID, all the information that he's prepping them for, that he wants the FBI to get and turn over to the defense, that he's clearly written in his report, would prove that Bryan Kohberger is not guilty. He wants them to fight for that information. It is quite apparent to me, in my humble opinion, this is all just my opinion.
But their problem that
Can
they
you
have,
tell me what that would be?
Well, it'd be that mobile advertiser ID. It would be mapping all of the AT&T records and looking at the pattern of life of Brian over 6 months, where we see these routine travel patterns. We can see where he's going, what he's doing, how long he's stagnating there.
The reason for this is clear to this investigator, Cy Ray. That pattern of life is tremendously exculpatory for Mr. Kohberger.
Understanding pattern of life is everything for this case. The problem the FBI has is to make that stalking case, they're going to have to disclose or discover new evidence that never came out from the state of Idaho. And now you have these competing cases where you have a case that allegedly went through the entire process of discovery and never produced the evidence that's needed. And now for a federal case to all of a sudden say, oh, by the way, here's this other evidence, they've painted themselves into a corner that they can't explain.
Now back to the 4D chess, y'all. And because OPOV is probably exposing more than even the defense team wants him to expose at this point, I can't help it. I got to expose everything that I think. This is all just my opinion, right? But remember, you've got opposite ends of the triangle. You got Cy Ray down here, you've got Turvey up here, and you got Ann Taylor down here. Well, the only way to make sure that Cy Ray is putting himself at odds against the other two is, I mean, it's almost an art of war scenario for Steve G to really buy in and push for that evidence to be actually sought after. He's got to expose half of the ruse, and put himself far away just in case they're expecting it. And he literally, if you watch my video the other day where I went through and showed you the entire plan with Ann Taylor or one of the team falling on the sword and all that, it is unbelievable to me what we listen to next. Listen how Cy Ray puts it all out there, but separates himself.
But on that point, I think what you guys are hitting at this, it's frustrating to see is, Turvey wants to say that there's cleanup because of things that are absent. Basically, there's things that aren't in a bathroom, therefore it's indicative of cleanup. There's no evidence of what that bathroom looked like before or after. Like, if we start building a case on that type of speculation, Bryan Kohberger is going to walk, right? That's just absurd. And I felt a deep obligation to call Turvey out. And, I'm going to piece something together for you guys. And I've been on the fence if I should voice this, but I think it's the right thing to do. So if I get in trouble later on, so be it. Don't get caught up in what I believe is a very rehearsed scam that is happening right now. If you look at what's happened over the last 3 months, let me help you guys connect some dots. Brett Turvey gets with Whitcomb, who's another idiot. Like, the guy who's never investigated a homicide is going to be the armchair quarterback that's going to change this thing, right? So Turvey and Whitcomb partner up. Turvey becomes very outspoken about this. And what does Ann Taylor do? She publicly reprimands him and issues this cease and desist. If you think about what Turvey's saying Bryan Kohberger is innocent, that this is a big conspiracy, that there's other people. I mean, he goes as far as saying Dylan is potentially how absolutely absurd. Yet Ann Taylor reprimands him from proclaiming BK's innocence. I come out with a book. I go around to law enforcement. Ann knows I told her I was going to go teach law enforcement. I have been very, very clear. I've always thought Bryan Kohberger is guilty. I think in 10 out of 10 courts in America convict this kid. Every single time we go to court, he gets convicted. The question is, does all the evidence come in because of some of the ways that the evidence was managed, which is a whole different conversation. But I am very outspoken that Bryan Kohberger is the guy. Why hasn't Ann issued a letter to me about breaching my NDA or all this stuff? I will argue any day of the week. What I am saying is way more detrimental to the defense's case than what Brian Turvey said, or Brent Turvey. And she did the one with Turvey. If you guys look at the picture, and here's the critical dates, the Thursday before the plea deal, Ann says in open court, Your Honor, I can't effectively represent my client if I don't get the continuation. So you have the primary attorney on this case saying in open court, it's one of the last statements she made before the plea deal, I cannot effectively represent my client. Those are not small words for an attorney to say in open court. And then
I wouldn't have allowed him.
72 hours later, we have a plea deal. And the way the plea deal came down, the way you guys were notified is disgusting. I've never seen that in 30 years. Like that, there's all kinds of craziness going on there.
We just learned that his family's there at the plea deal. His family was there. So they learned before we did. That's the disrespect that we
What are you getting at, though, Si? If you can just connect the pieces of what you're trying to say a little more, I'm
We
just
have
trying
the
to follow.
ineffective counsel. We have the ineffective counsel claim. We have the plea deal gets worked out within 72 hours. And Taylor stays on as Kohberger's attorney. Like this last year, she's the only person on the jail logs that was visiting him on a regular basis. He hasn't sought out new counsel. She's very much in his ear on a daily basis. We then see the Turvey Whitcomb book come out where, hey, there's all this conspiracy. Anne has to separate herself from that and says, oh, I don't agree with this. I'm going to reprimand you guys. Like, don't say these things. And now we see Bryan drop. And I knew the appeal was coming. In my book that I sent to the publisher in February, which is a manual, it's not a Bryan Kohberger tell-all, I put it in the book. Like, the appeal is coming. There's no doubt about it.
You called it before it happened.
And what I'm convinced about is Turvey and Anne are together on this. Turvey and Anne are not at odds. Anne needed some new information because that's the only way an ineffective counsel gets any legs at all. They need something new to get spun up. They need it to be very well known. And now there has to be this separation where Anne is helping Bryan, but not directly involved. And who takes that role is Turvey. So Turvey comes out, says all this nonsense. Bryan writes his thing. The last missing piece, and mark my words, I think we're going to see it in the next 60 to 90 days. Anne will absolutely fall on her sword for BK. She is a true believer. She believes he's innocent. She has an unhealthy relationship with him. And I think we're going to see Anne come out in the next like 60 to 90 days, maybe a little bit longer, depending on the timeline. And she's going to eat the ineffective counsel. She's going to say, he's right. I missed it. I should have known about it.
Now, y'all have to agree with me that isn't it very, very strange that the entire scenario that Cy Ray just laid out there was almost word for word what I put out in this video the other day? I mean, it is almost word for word. The only thing that's different than what I put out in this video is Cy Ray himself's involvement in this same scenario. So if I was right in everything I've speculated about, and if he was right, then this scenario is exactly like he just described, except he is literally playing undercover agent to infiltrate the G's and get them to be unknowing, unwilling accomplices. And here's what's funny is Steve G will automatically come with the most absurd thing I've ever heard in my life, which tells me that either people lie to him or he's just spinning the biggest yarn I've ever even thought of, because it relates to boxing. And good grief, you know, I jumped on this really quick. Listen to how ridiculous this is.
You're not true crime anymore. You're speculation, Hollywood fan fiction crap. I'm going to go even further. I'm going to let some stuff out of the bag. So I've talked to some authors, and so they actually have footage of BK boxing. He's an amateur boxer. They have a whole thing of him in the ring. 3 minutes, 162 punches. 160. That was going to be like, oh, he couldn't do 150 in 12 minutes. Now they have him in 3 minutes throwing blows of 162 times.
And this is where I went, you got to be kidding me, because believe me, I've know enough about boxing and fighting to know that somebody throwing 162 punches in a round, a 3-minute round, you would be in the record books, especially for an amateur. Just on average, just to give you an idea, the average active boxer, 50 to 60 punches per round thrown. Counter punchers and defensive specialists, they average 30 to 45. High volume pressure fighters, 80 to 100 plus. Legendary volume punchers like Pacquiao and Calzaghe frequently exceeded 100 thrown per round. Frequently exceeded 100 because that's unheard of. Elite amateurs like Kohberger would have to be an elite amateur. They average 61 to 78 punches per round because amateur bouts are shorter, usually 3 rounds, 3-minute rounds. It gives them the ability to increase their output to, 61 to 78. Let's look, what's the record? Oh, no official verified record exists of an amateur boxer logging over 160 punches in a single round during a sanctioned bout. While elite amateur boxers maintain an incredibly high pace due to shorter fights, typically 3-minute rounds, logging 160 punches in a single round is virtually impossible under official amateur tracking for several historical and structural reasons. It's never been done in an amateur fight. Good grief, the lies that come out in the fan fiction is unbelievable.
Hollywood fan fiction crap.
Now, the final key to this, though, is the media, the mainstream morons. I don't believe this was ever part of the plan, but it is happening organically and unwittingly, and I think it may have an impact to push this thing where it needs to go.
Steve, I want the state, of course, you got to have an independent prosecutor. You can't have that bag of bones up there trying to try this case. That's out. That's over. But I want them to give him his wish. You want any trial? Fine. We have regretted the plea ever since we did it, and here's our chance. Why can't we do that, Steve?
I don't know. What do we get? Like 90% of capital cases go out on a plea, and we never make case law. I would love for this to be case law in Idaho.
Please, please, please take him to trial. Give him his wish. Okay, let me just ask y'all straight out. You said you wanted this to go to trial, as do I. Do you still feel the same way, Christy and Steve?
I do. I mean, I would love, because I think that it would just stop so much of these people just running their mouths in this conspiracy theory. At this point, with this much time gone by, I mean, I'd have to, put myself in that state of mind again, which is not an easy state of mind to put yourself in.
Well, what about the possibility, Steve Gonsalves, of the death penalty?
Yes.
The firing squad, that thing.
Yeah, honor the victims. The 4 people died from a lowlife that wasn't even a member of our community.
But what do you want, Steve? I mean, it's one thing for me to say, yes, I want a trial because I want to hear the truth. I want the world to know the truth. And we didn't know the truth with that pathetic showing in court at the time of the plea. Your daughter was the only one with the to stand up and speak the truth. Okay? So I'd like a prosecutor that has a similar set of, right? Can we find one of those? I'd like to see how this plays out with a real prosecutor and hear the facts. For instance, tell me what you were saying, Steve, about what was caught on video that maybe the rest of the world doesn't know about regarding his car and the phone and the car traveling together. Your daughter was the only one with the to stand up and speak the truth.
Good grief. Did you hear what Nancy Grace just said? Steve G gave the same victim impact statement that his daughter did at the hearing, but she just said his daughter was the only one with any the set of ones to actually stand up and give the truth, meaning Steve doesn't have a set. She's telling him he doesn't have a set if he doesn't go along with this.
Christy, while we are bandying back and forth the possibilities of a trial, that is what happened. We may have a chance at justice, Christy. Okay, let me just ask y'all straight out. You said you wanted this to go to trial, as do I. Do you still feel the same way? But what do you want, Steve? I mean, it's one thing for me to say, yes, I want a trial because I want to hear the truth. I want the world to know the truth. And we didn't know the truth with that pathetic showing in court at the time of the plea. But I want them to give him his wish. You want any trial? Fine.
So in my opinion, well, Nancy Grace, yeah, she's just going to help the concept out tremendously, because she isn't going to listen to all that crawfishing and hemming and hawing. Oh, well, yeah, we don't really want a trial. We'd like to have one, but all those buts, all they want to hear, and they're going to keep on hammering them until they hear it. You want a trial. We want a trial. You get the death penalty. You got all the evidence you need. You'll win. They're going to keep on doing it until, the G's and everybody else starts demanding the trial. And if I'm right, Mr. Ray there is, he's digging for information from the G's. He's befriending and digging. Makes me think he really has enough information to possibly not like those G's very well if he's actually going CIA on them to try to get some information. And that's why I say with the VICAP questions, you start getting into VICAP, this is what I've been talking about this entire time. That was the team that would have went through the victimology on the families, right? The families of the victims. Now I've talked about, Maddie's dad and stepmom this whole time, Xana's mom. But it looks to me like that Mr. Ray is trying to inquire about some information about that G family. Now, I did in the past speculate on possible things that would make the G family create a target as well with Kaylee. And I hadn't brought those up in a long time. I'm not going to bring them up now, but I think it's very interesting that Cy Ray's digging in, possibly trying to gather some background information because those G's always refused to talk to the investigators because they lawyered up. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, but please like and subscribe to this channel. Post your comments, your thoughts, criticisms. Till next time, Pavarotti's out.